This is Jérémy Stevance, Digital Assets Manager at Deloitte France. For the past 4 years, Jérémy has helped build the auditing department for digital assets at Deloitte France, now servicing companies like Binance, Crypto.com or Circle, where they help with monthly proof of reserves for their Euro stablecoin. Jérémy, how can you gain assurance that the client has disclosed all their wallet addresses?
That is the $1 million answer. The first thing very important that we say to every audit team is that it's linked to the representation letter. We had a specific paragraph where the client confirms that he shared to us the completeness of the wallet.
And what are the auditor's responsibilities when the client uses a crypto subledger?
If my client says, okay, I use the subledger, do I know it? But do we ensure that the data that they provide is clear? Of course, if they use a subledger with comfort relating to SOC is a report, we will feel more comfortable.
Welcome to the Accountant Quits podcast, where we help accounting and finance professionals learn how to manage a business using crypto. Deloitte has developed Coinia, a proprietary tool where Deloitte can see 100% of hundreds of thousands of transactions and reconcile them to their clients' books. In this episode with Jérémy, we discuss the challenges of auditing digital assets, from proving completeness to verifying ownership, how to audit crypto exchanges in the absence of confirmation letters, why SOC and ISO reports are critical when clients rely on subledgers, the growing need for traditional auditors to build expertise in digital assets, and more. Jérémy, what are the prerequisites for accepting new audit engagements?
Thing that we ask really quickly when we discover that a client uses blockchain technology. We ask very quickly on the
Jérémy, welcome and thanks for making the time to be here.
Thank you very much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Jérémy, I want to start with the meat of the episode today, which is around crypto audit. So previously at Deloitte, you were auditing financial services companies. And like I mentioned, 4 years ago, you moved into their digital assets team. And ever since, you've been building this department. Later during the episode, I'll ask you to share your story of transitioning into the digital assets department. But I want to start the episode today on the challenges in auditing crypto companies. And one of the first challenge that I have is on relying on block explorers. So for the listeners less familiar, a block explorer is basically like the search engine for the blockchain. Anyone can view information about transactions, wallet addresses, block numbers on a specific blockchain. So these tools are used by accountants to reconcile their crypto balances, but auditors do not rely on block explorers. When auditors provide an audit opinion on the financial statements of a company, they need to obtain their audit evidence from independent sources, right? So usually the auditors would host their own node or maybe have access to a third-party data provider like Moralis, Alchemy, Infura, or like some of the popular names of the industry. I know I'm giving a lot of context, but I think it's important to give this to the listeners that auditors also use audit assertions when they devise their audit procedures. Audit assertions, what they are simply claims that establish whether or not financial statements are true and fairly represented. Now, the current challenge I'm describing, it pertains to completeness. That's like one of the audit assertions that auditors would use. So how can the auditor independently prove that all on-chain transactions have been recorded by the client? So, Jérémy, I want to ask you, starting with this completeness assertion, could you walk us through the challenges to query blockchain data as an auditor?
Yeah. That's a great question. A big major challenge as a blockchain auditor. And as you said, it's an assertion that is very, very important for us regarding that. As a big audit firm as Deloitte, that is a multinational audit firm, we have our own tool for more than 4 years. They started to develop it before that I joined and create the blockchain team with the partner. So we have our own tool named Coinia. So today Deloitte have own node on different blockchain, Ethereum, Solana, etc., to have their own data. That's the first thing that we developed when we started to develop the methodology of the audits on the blockchain transaction and to ensure the completeness, as you say. We help them a lot also to implement new blockchain technology, blockchain ecosystem. We help them to implement Tezos. It's a less used blockchain today, but in 21, 22, some transaction from our clients on that. So it was very important to have this blockchain on this tool. But it's a tool that we develop with person that work on that every day, with fees on that, etc., etc. So not every firm can add and develop this kind of tool. And as you said previously, that's a challenge for everyone. You talk about third-party provider like Moralis Actimi, and you're right that if you cannot have your own nodes, you need to have a third-party provider. And so as an auditor, we share trust, we guarantee trust for stakeholders. We need to have trust on these third-party stakeholders that the data that they provide is well and the completeness is okay on that. So that's on these matters that we will check on these different sources if there's, for example, the source as reliable with, for example, SOC or ISO report can be very important for us regarding that. It's truly very important, I think, for an audit firm to first ensure that the data that they receive from third-party provider is completeness and it's a share of trust for the client on that. So that's quite bit difficult for every audit firm, accounting firm. Not everyone can develop these kind of tools because, in my opinion, because it can be very not useful and not the cost will be bigger than the reward. So we can have several suggestions on that. Maybe one or several firms can develop it and propose the services to other audit firm as an external provider of service. So when you have a client on that and you don't have the tool, maybe you can use an external auditor that have the expertise on that to cover this kind of work. But that's a big challenge. As a big firm, it's quite more easier because we have this tool, even if we pay because it's developed in the US. So we reverse fees on the US part, but more challenging for smaller company to have a third party that we can.
Jérémy, I've got 2 follow-up questions. So during the course of the episode today, I also want probably the smaller audit firms to understand how to start to audit digital assets. Now, when you say, not everyone can actually set up this infrastructure and it's expensive, it's time consuming, but you can also have access to these third-party data providers, but then you have to get assurance about the completeness of their data. So you would request like a SOC report or an ISO report. So maybe a smaller audit firm, they don't have the expertise to set all the nodes in-house. Would that be the go-to solution to just use like a third-party data provider, but then get assurance about using like one of the SOC reports or ISO reports that they may have?
Yeah. Okay. I think a small firm, if the small firm wants to audit a client at that, he can, but it will be time consuming and cost consuming, I would say. If he wants to invest in that, he definitely can. I think the most important part is to have discussion with the third-party provider about the data, about how we can be sure that they have the completeness of the data. What are the process in this data provider that ensure that you will have the completeness of the data? And at this stage of the discussion, normally this kind of provider will talk about SOC and ISO reports. I also have another third-party data provider that is named Kaiko, for example, that have the same business model that we talk about, Actini, etc. They provide data from blockchain with their own nodes, but also more analysis. We talk a lot with them, and we know for sure that, for example, for them, all the ISO and SOC reports are okay and available from this one. So when you have more trust on this one, you can use this data provider. We can always add more processes in order to be sure that the data is completeness. If you want to use several data sources, for example, but it can be more cost consuming, for example. So it's very important to have discussion to understand well what is your data provider and to ensure that when you have that, it's the most important part because then it's just I would say dashboard that highlight you the transaction to date and highlight you table, transaction flow, etc., etc. That can be more easier to develop. So if the firm wants you to go and invest in it, go 100%. Yes, that's the reason that some maybe one or two audit firms that develop this tool can easily also provide these services to other firms that are not specialists in Web3 ecosystem, but say, oh, this client started to buy Bitcoin. And it's just one client. I don't need to have this kind of tool. I don't need to develop it. So please be my experts on that to give me comfort on the completeness of transaction, on the valuation of the Bitcoin that they own, etc., etc. That's basically what we do at Deloitte. Today, we don't talk so much today, but every client in France, because I'm from Deloitte France, every client that use blockchain technology, we are the expert for the auditors, and we review with our tools that's thanks to our nodes. We are reviewing all blockchain transactions. We are validating the valuation, the completeness, the reality of all these transactions, and also checking on different check on AML, CFT also, to give trust and assurance to auditor that, okay, on this part of the financial statement, it's okay.
So my second follow-up question was today, if like another Deloitte from another jurisdiction in the world, they want to start offering crypto auditing services, they could rely on the expertise of like a Deloitte France, a Deloitte US, who already have the technical knowledge or the infrastructure of hosting these nodes in-house.
That's a great question, and it depends. It depends because we are the center of expertise in France, but we have several other in UK, in Germany, in Spain, in Italy, Netherlands. For example, they have their own expertise, so they don't need, if there's an audit client, they don't need to ask for Deloitte France. But for example, we already performed some audit mission, review from smart contract also for Luxembourg clients, Belgium clients, because they didn't have the expertise. That's the strongest part of big group, big international group, is that if you're an expertise somewhere, you can use it on the country if they need it just at this moment.
Now, the other assertion, apart from completeness, is about ownership. So how does the auditor prove that the client has control over the wallet addresses that they say they own? So a common approach for proving ownership is for the client to sign a message using like their private key that controls the specific wallet, or to perform a small transaction to like an address specified by the auditor. But what if the client has like 1,000 wallet addresses? Could you walk us through how you prove ownership on all the wallets that the client say they own?
Yeah, that's a very difficult and tricky question. If there is 1,000 wallets, but you said the truth that this signing message is the standard. Today, it's the things that we need to process in order to ensure the ownership and to be sure at 100%. But we had the case, to be honest, that we had a client that was not comfortable about signing message. Just about that. There's the signing process, but sometimes just the client say, no, we don't want to do this. Why? Because this client just were not so aware about Web3 technology. Just as a reminder, my kind of clients that I have in audits can be pure player Web3, but also traditional client that just buy some Bitcoin just to diversify the cash that they had. So when we talk about signing message, etc., they were just a little bit scared that the risk of that their Bitcoin can go away, etc. So they didn't want. So we needed first to have another procedure to ensure that. For this client, for example, we went on site and see that the client really have the hardware. It was a hot wallet. We checked the hardware. They connected to the dedicated platform. We saw the Bitcoin, and they, like as you said previously, they started simulate a transaction, and at the end didn't validate the transaction. But we have the very great comfort that okay, all the transaction process they did it, and we are very comfort that it was just one push button to okay, and so to validate the transaction. So we are very great comfort on that. Now there is another challenge that, to be honest, I don't see a lot. That if there is a lot of wallets that you have, as I said previously, my clients are more traditional clients that have 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 maybe wallets, so it's kind of easy. And also the client that we had on the Web3 ecosystem have not so much wallet also. So, but if I want to answer your great question, first we need to check if we can check the full ownership of all these wallets. If it's not possible in terms of human capability, we need to perform an in-depth analysis on the wallets and, define different kind of groups of these wallets. Okay, we have the exhaustivity. We will talk later about how can we have the exhaustivity of the wallet, but we have the exhaustivity of the 1,000 wallets. Okay, we need with our tool to analyze what are these wallets, what are the transactions they perform, what are the balance that had, to define what are the very important wallets that we need to check because it's very important for the activity and for the continuity of the activity. And then maybe another category and maybe other categories that's, okay, it's a wallet that have no transaction or no balances, etc. And so we prioritize on the biggest, I say the biggest, but we will perform, for example, a sample size to define the number of wallet that we will need to check. But with this definition of population, we will ensure that, okay, if in 1,000 we have 100 wallets that are very important, because if we are not sure there's a risk on the activity and the continuity, we need to know this one. And if 100, we need to do that, unfortunately. But it can help to reduce a little bit the figures.
And how can you gain assurance that the client has disclosed all their wallets that they should have, or like they didn't forget to account for one?
Yeah, that is the $1 million answer. That's very important because it's great to perform work and to work hours and hours to say, okay, this is the valuation, etc. But if you don't have the completeness of the list of the wallet that they have, the work is kind of useless because missing parts. To be honest, that's a tricky part because the client, if they don't want to highlight some wallets, it's kind of easy for them. But the first thing very important that we say to every audit team is that it's linked to the representation later. We had a specific paragraph where the client confirms that he shared to us the completeness of the wallets, of all the wallets. Thanks to that, all the responsibility on that is on the client. If, for example, after we audit some transaction, we discover 1 month or years later that they're missing transaction, it's the fault of the client because it didn't share the exhaustivity of the wallet. But also because it's just, I would say, too easy just to say, okay, we write paragraph on the representation later and now it's the fault of the client, so let's continue. We also perform on-chain analysis with the wallet that we received, just to analyze not also just the transaction, but also the pattern. Or if there's some transaction that implying other wallet that we may think that can be the client, for example. It's quite difficult, but it's a deep analysis in order to see if there is some patterns or things that can imply the client on missing some wallets.
Before we continue, let's take a quick commercial break from our sponsor. If you're serious about running your business using crypto, you need tools built for crypto. One of my favorite apps, and yes, one that I use multiple times a month, is Request Finance. This app has been a game changer in how I invoice my clients and receive stable coins and crypto directly in my wallet. But hey, there's so much more to it. Request Finance is the all-in-one platform for crypto operations. Accounts payable, accounts receivable, expenses, and even accounting. Plus, they've got a killer multi-pay off-ramp to over 190 countries, meaning you can pay someone with crypto and they get fiat in their bank account. Request Finance connects to over 20 blockchain networks, including Ethereum, Solana, Base, Arbitrum, Near, and more. Here are some features that I love. Batch payments using your preferred wallet of choice, a single dashboard to track all invoices with real-time updates. All invoices contain the transaction hash for easy audits. But hey, don't take my word for it. Try it out for yourself. Head over to requestfinance/partners/theaccountantquits and get 2 months for free with all the pro account features. Join 3,000 finance leaders today using Request Finance and make crypto operations simpler, compliant, and less stressful.
Great. So to summarize, the client will be providing the auditor with a representation letter asserting that they did actually disclose 100% of their wallets to the auditor. Now, in your experience, what are, maybe from the companies you've audited, what are some good practices for management now to document the creation of a new wallet? Because, for example, like if you open a new bank account, those would be typically approved and recorded in board minutes. But with wallets being so easy to create, how should companies build similar governance and documentation?
That's the thing that we ask really quickly when we discover that a client use blockchain technology. We ask very quickly on the internal control process review that they develop process and controls related to that to ensure that who is the creator, who is the reviewer, who is performing the transaction, etc., to ensure as a bank account, as a different type of process in the company, that the creation of blockchain account is very clear for every person, with each person have their own roles and responsibility. It's one of the first recommendations that we say every time that we talk with a new client. Okay, but and I saw with clients that sometimes some procedures were not written, and we discovered that thanks to blockchain transaction, because everything is written on blockchain. So it was very easy for us to find that and to highlight to the management that there is an issue on that. And thanks to that, a year later, they were processed, they were controls, and everything were much better.
Thanks, sharing. Now, challenge number 3 I have, at least for today, and this is a non-exhaustive list, is on auditing data from crypto exchanges. So a lot of companies, of course, use centralized exchanges like the Binance, Coinbase, Krakens of the world. And unlike banks, these exchanges, they don't typically provide like audit-style confirmation letters. So the auditors would have to rely on APIs to access client balances and transactions. How do you approach auditing crypto exchanges in practice? Do you lean more on a controls-based procedures, or is it primarily a substantive testing approach?
That's also a very important question. You're right on that. To quick answer, it's both the control-based procedure and substantive testing. I will go deeper in that lately. But just as you mentioned, confirmation letters is difficult because it's not processed on the centralized exchange. As anecdotes, I already received one confirmation from one centralized exchange that everyone knows. We were quite surprising. To be honest, we're not sure that next year we will have it also. But yes, it's not a process that is performed today. It's not an obligation, I would say. But as a European country, and with MiCA, we know that these actors, the centralized exchange, will need to report to regulators a lot of data every month. So we have hope that these kind of reports that they perform to the regulators will help to build a practice of process to send to us confirmation to auditors. But it's in the near future, I hope, but it's not the case still. But as we told previously, you talk about control-based procedure and substantive testing. And I said both. To be honest, if I have a client that uses API from Binance, I know Binance. I want to say on the first thing that says, okay, it's Binance. It can be okay. But we need to document it on our paperwork that, yes, it's okay. So we need to perform a control-based procedure, notably on the IT side. We talk a lot with IT team to review the API connectivity, for example, if it's relevant. We talk about API. Sometimes it's not API. Sometimes some client just use the data that they download on Binance. And also we review the first and second level we talked previously, that the procedure and control that they put in place on that. So the design, the implementation, and the operating effectiveness. So sometimes it's automated controls that we need to be sure that it's relevant. Okay, the API is extracting data that they will use in their tools. Or how they can ensure that the completeness of the data. But with that, it's not sufficient for us. We also perform some substantive testing, like, of course, analytical review to understand the activities this year of the client compared to, for example, previous year. And also test of details. I think it's this in English also, to ensure test transaction to ensure the reality and the valorization of this kind of transaction. Also, we use sampling size tools internally to define that, how many transactions we need to check. And then we also perform the traditional banking procedure, but with centralized exchange. Also, we've checked the control, checked the balances, but it's at the end. It's when we check that, we ensure that the data that provide from Binance or a centralized exchange, it's correct. But there is a lot of steps before. And we all other sometimes stakeholders like IT audit team.
When you say you check the operating effectiveness of controls, that's for the exchange, right? Is it easy to how do you get in touch with like a Binance or like any other exchange? Like you cannot just reach out to them, they won't reply, right?
Okay. When I talk about the operating effectiveness, I talk about the client that put the controls to ensure that the API that extract the data, all the manual extraction is correct and there's the completeness of all the data. It's not relating to Binance, it's more difficult on that. If you're right that we don't talk about Binance when we have a client that just extracts with an API once or 2 years.
Jérémy, the next topic I'd like to go through is around accepting an audit engagement and some of the prerequisites that you'll have to determine. Obviously, like we've been talking about, auditing crypto is complex, so there are certain preconditions for the auditors to assess whether they have the right expertise in-house, whether they need to bring in further specialists, the different risk involved. Now, in your view, what are the factors that auditors should consider before they take a client that holds crypto assets? Maybe some of the questions that they'll have to ask. You mentioned one earlier around what is like, for example, their documentation process when they create like new wallets. So what are some of the questions that you would typically be asking at the start of the audit before you even accept the engagement?
Yeah, it's true. We talked a little bit before on that. We talk about accepting the audit engagement. So we don't start the mission, we don't accept it already. First, it's the basic question, and we talk a little bit about that. Do we have the expertise? Just basic question. If I'm used to have, I don't know, traditional clients, and today I have a client that say, oh, I diversify my bank accounts and I buy some Bitcoin. Do I have the expertise? No. Okay. At Deloitte, so it's quite an easy question. If I don't have it, do we know another firm that can have this expertise and can delegate it to accept the mission and delegate it to this specific part to another audit firm? That's very important. But before that, I need to ask myself, do I want to develop this expertise? And we talked about that previously. I need a tool. I need a data provider that I can trust it. Do I want to? Some audit firm will say yes. Some audit firm will say no. If so, do I know another firm? And if not, I would say the answer is just basically no. It's too specific. I don't need to know what the procedure, the control that's in place, etc. I just say on basic, on the first scale, do I have the expertise or can I delegate it? If it's not, I can have trust. I can share trust on the specific accounts on the balance sheets and the financial statements, so I cannot accept the mission.
Now, Jérémy, you started working with Deloitte since 2016, and at the time you were auditing banks and other companies in the financial services industry. In September 2021, you moved to their digital assets department. You've played a key role in servicing major clients, like I mentioned in the intro, like Circle, LVMH, Société Générale, Binance, and more. You've been working under the supervision of Marilyn Ricard, the partner at Deloitte. And can you share your story of building this digital assets department at Deloitte France?
I talked with some person that said, oh, you're so lucky to be here, this position, etc. First, before to explain how we develop it, how I joined the team is I create my own luck, I would say, because I was very passionate about this technology, of course, personally first. When Marilyn Ricard came in at Deloitte to develop the team, I directly contacted her and shared to her a report that I created to highlight what are the different use cases that you can have on blockchain technology. Because DeFi for me at this stage and 2021 was very important for me because, as you said previously, my clients were banks and financial institutions. So when I discovered blockchain technology, or I go deeper in the blockchain ecosystem and I discovered DeFi, it was, wow, it's amazing. It's what my clients are doing, but everyone can use these services and propose the services. So I created my own log to highlight to her that I'm very passionate and I want to work with her to develop it. It was also a great moment because I was, in France, I have my French CPA, and it was the moment that I wrote my thesis for obtaining it. And so the first thing that we had on our roadmap when we started this team was to develop a methodology to audit blockchain transaction on a French perspective, because we had some guideline, I would say, from the global. So when I say global, I say US, but we needed to implement it in France and to adapt it to the specificities of French. That's a basic thing. But for example, on IFRS, you can book your crypto on an inventory account. It's not the case in France. We have a dedicated account in the cash section. So these kind of things need to be updated. And so that was the first thing that we developed, the methodology. How can we audit our client? We already start the discussion with acceptance, with the review of the procedure and controls, the completeness, etc. All these things were the question that we had in 2021. It was the great best time because it was during, this previous, I would say, bull run in 2021 when a lot of clients, also corporation, started to invest or to develop NFTs, etc. So we started to have a lot of mission on audit on this part. We also we needed it to develop our brand, I would say, or what's the perception of the market in France that, okay, Deloitte now is not just financial firm, it's also technological on blockchain technology. So we needed to develop our brand in this ecosystem, and we still continue today. And thanks to that, we also started to develop other kind of mission, which are insurance missions. When I say insurance mission, is when we trust the client, but it's not financial audit. We can talk about, for example, the proof of reserve that we perform for Circle, but also for other stablecoin project in France. We can talk about the audit readiness. Now we have the methodology and we audit clients and we recommend them. But some clients are not ready for audits and need to implement process controls relating to blockchain technology because they are pure players and they don't use to know, the habits of auditors. So they ask us for help. And also we help the other teams at Deloitte to think about cybersecurity, for example, to develop also their practice on blockchain side. So we help them a lot. Thanks to that, we have great brand. I think about crypto.com or Binance that we perform their cybersecurity audits. And thanks to that, we continue to develop it and develop on the, I would say, consulting part. So I make this question on that because it's not on the audit part, but thanks to that, we help clients to define their strategy of how can they use blockchain technology. We help a public financial institution in France to define their 5 years roadmap on that. And we also help recently the city of Cannes. It's a city in the south of France. Some people already know that because know this city because it's where the ECC 8, I guess now 7 maybe. So it's one of the first use cases that we propose when we define the strategy. It's that you need a festival in your city because you used to have a festival in your city from real estate, cinema, etc. You need to have a blockchain event. And so the first use case was to have the ECC in Cannes. And they continue to develop it, and we help them to put the strategy in place. You can now pay with your crypto in Cannes, for example, etc., etc.
Can I interrupt you? So I wanted to go through some of these use cases and clients that you work with. You were just talking about ECC. Maybe you can stay on ECC and then we'll move on to Circle. So for example, ECC, it was their 7th or 8th year they were organizing this. Could you go maybe through how you help them specifically in the city of Cannes? Because I saw a lot of vendors then in the city, like hotels, restaurants, were accepting payments in crypto. Was the work tied to that or was it tied to something else?
The point for us is that we, as the city of Cannes, so we present our strategy for the city, for the mayor, for all this public institution. We don't really we talked with the ETC organizer that helped to develop the ETC since it started, because he represents the Ethereum France and is in the Ethereum Foundation. But we didn't work directly with them. They, as you said, they organize it for years and years, so they don't need us. Can needed us to define a strategy. They said, okay, we are a city and we want to use blockchain technology and to understand, well, how can we use blockchain technology? But they don't know really what is this technology. So we help them to, first we started to understand, well, what is CAN, how it's working inside, what are the problems, and how can blockchain technology can help them on that. And the first use cases that we defined was to, okay, you want to highlight that CAN is a technologic city, so you need to have an event in CAN. And so they started to talk with ETC by themselves in order to implement it in CAN. So we never really worked directly with ETC. We never signed a contract with them. It was with the city of CAN in order to ensure that they put the strategy in place.
And moving on maybe to Circle, so could you maybe explain the work that you do regarding proof of reserves, but even like how does a proof of reserve exercise actually even work, just for the listeners to understand?
Yes, you're right. That's a tricky word, I would say, because some people have a different definition of proof of reserve. For us, the proof of reserve for Circle is to ensure that all the reserves that they have for their activity of issuing stablecoin are completeness. They have the completeness and it's real. The reserve that they have is real, in order to ensure the parity with the dollar. So every quarter, I guess, we perform this proof of reserve. The first thing is to receive from the Circle to say, okay, at this day, I have this amount of stablecoin in circulation, this amount of cash position, etc., in my bank account in my different banks, in order to ensure that I am well collateralized for my activity. And this is this paper that we are challenging. So we will use our tool, as I say, Coinia, that will go directly on the blockchain to check the supply of the USDC or the euro coin also, in order to validate the amount of the number of stablecoin that circulates. And we will perform, and I would say it's more traditional work. I would say we check the balances of the bank accounts, the position that they may have on T-bonds, etc., to ensure that the valuation of the reserve are correct, are real, and that they cover the stablecoin. And we issue every month or every quarter a report that explains all the work that we perform and if it's okay for us or not. Basically, it's that. But there's another tricky work that we need to perform now, that there is MiCA. MiCA implies that the USDC that are using by European clients need to be in the European country. So now Circle cannot have 100% reserve in the US and perform an activity in France and in Europe, basically, and deploy USDC and etc. So we need now to also review the process and control that they put in place and of the rebalancing process. So now they have two reserves on the US for the US and world clients, and in France and for the European clients. And so we are reviewing the models and the effectiveness of the models and if it's relevant, and they have the correct amount of reserve in France for the European clients. That's also another work that we need to perform in order to ensure that the reserves are well implemented for the European clients.
Great. Thanks for sharing. Now, I want to move on, Jérémy, with the adoption of crypto in France, but not specifically by retail, more for enterprises, because that's the focus of the Accounting Quiz podcast.
Yeah.
So I saw that Deloitte France has contributed to the report published by Adam on the adoption of digital assets from retail and corporates. And for the listeners, what is Adam? Is basically a French non-profit, is translated to, if you want to know, Association for the Development of Digital Assets in English, which aims to support and educate companies in the Web3 space. Now, based on this report, what are still like some of the hurdles that enterprises are facing for the adoption of Web3, crypto in general in France, and maybe what changes in regulation, banking, anything, would make it easier for French enterprises to build Web3 businesses because you're at the heart of like everything, all the new developments of crypto in France.
Yes, that was a very great work that we performed and very interesting because we also presented the French Ministry of Technology and also we presented in the French Ministry of Finance and recently in London for financial institutions. It's a very important report, notably for public institutions that are well aware that it's very important for them. As we talked previously, you said previously, yes, it's about the adoption in the industry. We just talk about the industry. Just so you know, it's based on quantitative and qualitative data. Quantitative that we have with a survey and qualitative thanks to interview with more than 80 actors that we interview. And these actors are in France, in UK, in Germany, Belgium, Italy, and Netherlands. So basically, the major figures that we highlight, 70% of the industry that we asked said that they wanted to hire this year. Of course, developers remain high demand, but now due to MiCA, the compliance rules are also growing in the second role that they want to employ. Relating to MiCA, it's a major topic in Europe. We asked them about the perception that they have about MiCA. And we divide the answer with pure player. When I said pure player, the company that develop Web3 use cases, and the traditional firms that develop a Web3 branch. I'm talking about banks, public institutions, LVMH, etc., etc. And it's quite the opposite. For the pure player, almost more or less 80% said that the perception of MiCA is neutral or negative. But for the traditional, it's the opposite. 80% say it's positive or neutral. So it's like that MiCA is great for big institutions to have trust on and have comfort on this ecosystem, but it's very difficult for the pure player to see the future and to ensure that the innovation and the position will be still here in the next years. Another major point in this study is the financing. Europe is good, notably at a small funding round, but not big ones. We already know that, but thanks to that, thanks to this study, we have no data. For example, for fundraising more than €1 million, 55% of the fund for the Web3 ecosystem come from the US. And overall, the fundings in Europe for the Web3 ecosystem, it's 47% of the fundings are from the US. So it's like that we are really dependent on the US relating to the fundings, even if we are in Europe. And it's something that we want to, a bell that we want to ring. Okay, we need to develop that to have more fundings in this ecosystem from Europe. So the report is in French, of course, but it's also in English. As I said, it's combined quantitative data, well visualized with infographic, and qualitative input. So I highly recommend it to download it.
I'll share the link of the report in the show notes as well. I'm just looking at the time. I've got a last question I want to ask you, Jérémy, but maybe even before that, a follow-up on what we were just discussing. What are some of the crypto-friendly banks in France? If you can name a few. It's also about if a company would be transferring funds from like a crypto exchange to like that bank, they would not freeze your account or they would not close your account, you know?
Yeah, that's a very important point. And with ADAN, the non-profit association, they work a lot on that because it's still an issue in France and I think in other countries that, okay, maybe Société Générale is its own subsidiary and develops stablecoin, but yes, if you're a client and if you send money from Binance, you may have problems or a question, etc. So it's still an issue today.
Now, the last question, Jérémy, before we wrap up, is around subledgers. So a lot of the listeners are using subledgers like, I've just mentioned some names like crypto, trust finance, the list is very long. But could you explain what would be the auditor's responsibilities in the event a client is using a subledger? Because they're using all this to collect, process the data from the blockchain before they export it to like their accounting software. I think in France use Penny Lane. So what would you be requesting from your client if they're using like a subledger?
The first thing, is the data reliable? Can I use it? We still understand. It's the first thing. If my client say, okay, I use this subledger, do I know it? Do we ensure that the data that it provide is clear? And we are going back to the previous answer with the SOC, ISO report, etc. We'll not go deeper in that because we already talked about that. It's the same logic. And we also have the same logic when a client develop a private blockchain. Okay, you develop a private blockchain. I think about JP Morgan. It's not our client, but everyone hear about JP Morgan that developed his own private blockchain. Okay, that's great. But your private blockchain create data that you're using in accounting, but I can be sure that this data is okay. So we need to be sure, can be a IT audit, etc., etc. So when a client is using a subledger, I need to be sure what is this subledger. It can be reliable or not. You talk about Crypto Bitwave, this kind of tool that we already hear, or some clients already using it. Bitwave is a partner of Deloitte. We talk with them a lot. So of course, if they use a subledger with comfort relating to SOC ISO report, we will feel more comfortable than another tools that we don't know where it's come from. And if this tool we don't know, we need to perform more work on that.
Perfect. Thanks, sharing. Jérémy, I'm looking at the time. It's probably time to wrap up the episode. I wanted to have you today, Jérémy, because the whole point of the Accountant Quits podcast is to inspire, prepare, educate accountants, for a large part of them coming from Web 2 into Web 3. So having someone like you, Jérémy, you were auditing like traditional financial companies, and now you transition, 4 years ago, you transitioned into the digital assets department. I think like those stories are always good for people contemplating about transitioning as well into the Web3 industry. So thanks a lot for coming in today, Jérémy. Maybe as closing thoughts, if there was something that you'd like to share with the listeners about maybe for those contemplating like a career in the Web3 industry, or how would you summarize this episode today?
First, thank you very much to having me today. Very glad to talk with you, and I hope it will help some, as you say, accountants or auditors that want to go deeper in the Web3 ecosystem to understand well what is going on in this wonderful ecosystem. And it's a thing that this ecosystem is wonderful for a lot of people as accountant and auditor, because we learn every day, and every day on different topics, technically, humanly, in terms of brains. You know, I talk with a lot of accountants and auditors that join this space because there are new questions every day. How to book NFTs, how to book stablecoins, the valuation, tax impact, etc. So also in this ecosystem, there's still much work that remains to ensure the consistency of accounting standard, for example, or how company will book all these transactions. I talked previously with the IFRS that need to continue to evolve on that. So I look forward to seeing this evolution positively. And so for all the people that hear us and are in the Web2 ecosystem, continue to learn a lot in order to help to develop this ecosystem and notably on this accounting and audit part.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing, Jérémy. On this podcast, I usually like to ask to the guests before they leave. It's like a tradition on this podcast for their favorite quote or maxim.
Yes, it reminds me that, as I said previously, that a quote that I think it's Alan, it's a computer science pioneer. The quote is, the best way to predict the future is to create or invent it. So I think I like this quote because that's so basic, but so true. And it's definitely what is happening in the blockchain and Web3 ecosystem. We are developing it together with our own expertise. Actually, we are talking about accounting and auditing, but there are other expertise that we need. And thanks to together, we are developing it. I hope with a brighter future for this ecosystem.
Thank you. That's a great quote.
Thank you very much.
If people want to reach out to you, Jérémy, if they want to learn more about the work that you're currently doing at Deloitte, how should they do so?
They can follow me on LinkedIn, very professional first. I also have a Telegram that I can share. So if there are any questions, I think it's the most relevant social network for that.
Sounds good. Well, thanks a lot for your time today, Jérémy. It was great recording, and we'll be in touch.
Yes, definitely. Thank you again.